Hello, I'm Tom Rousell. I've been a pagan for the last 14 years, and today I'm going to tell you how to arrange a pagan altar in your home. I'm an historian, but today I'm not going to approach this topic like an historian at all. I am instead going to provide an ethnographic survey of several different modern pagan groups' recommendations for how to arrange a domestic altar, and then I'm also going to show you how I prefer to do it at the end. So this is kind of like a guide for you to look at how others, important groups in the world at the moment, would arrange a pagan altar. If you're looking for tips on how to pray to the gods and you're new to paganism, I recommend you check out an earlier video of mine called How to Pray Like an Indo-European, and that will give you all the basics you need on how to arrange your prayers. But it doesn't explain how to arrange an altar, and some people have been asking me about how to do that, so that's what I'll be approaching in this video. Domestic worship, that means worshipping the gods in your home, is a really important part of pretty much every religion in the world today. Whether you have Roman Catholics with their shrines in the house, Hindus, Buddhists, Shinto in Japan, all of them. And also, we know a lot about how ancient Romans and Greeks had domestic shrines of this kind too. That's because the home is a sacred place too. And in the Roman context, the head of the family, the father, was called the pater familias, and he was also symbolically the high priest of his own home, which was like a temple in miniature. And one of the responsibilities he had was to propitiate the gods of the home and maintain the home shrine. It's important to note that domestic worship is not a substitute for communal worship, which is really important in paganism and usually takes place at the high festivals at a sacred place, such as at a temple, which is a designated temple for the gods, or perhaps at a burial ground with the burial mounds, which are also very important in Indo-European forms of paganism. Designated temple buildings are not limited to Greco-Roman paganism, as some claim. We have plenty of textual evidence for Germanic pagan temples in the Norse sources, but also archaeological evidence, even for Anglo-saxon temples, as well as there is textual evidence as well in the writings of the Venerable Bede for Anglo-Saxon temples. But we actually have a specific example of what is very likely to be an Anglo-Saxon temple at Yeathering in Northumberland. It's called Building D2, and this CGI reconstruction you're seeing now is by Robert Molyneux. It's widely interpreted as a dedicated shrine room because it contained no evidence of human habitation at all, but it did have a large pit containing sacrificial animal bones, mainly ox skulls. And there are also 3 post holes behind a partition wall which are thought to have been where the idols of the gods stood. But we also know that Germanic people worshipped at home too, just like the Romans did. Because I'm an Englishman, I worship the English gods. I practice English paganism, which is derived from Anglo-Saxon paganism and is a regional variant of Germanic paganism, which is practiced in various forms throughout the world. The most common form of Germanic paganism today is Norse paganism, which is variously termed Odinism, Heathenry, or Asatru. So this video will be about setting up a Germanic pagan altar for your home. However, very similar principles apply for domestic altars in other forms of European paganism as well. So you can probably watch this and apply some of the principles to your own religion, even if you're not a Germanic pagan. For example, this beautiful domestic altar stands in the garden of my colleague Dr. Borja Villayonga in Spain, and he practices Roman paganism, hence you see Roman gods there. It's really not that different to what we Germanic pagans have. So let's take a look at how different English-speaking Germanic pagan groups around the world recommend you to set up your domestic altars today, and after that I'll show you how I like to set my one up, and hopefully you'll be able to look at these different techniques and see what would work for you, and I hope you'll find this video very helpful. We'll start with the Odinist Fellowship, which is a British Norse pagan organisation founded back in the 1970s. Today they are the only Norse pagan group in Britain who have acquired a temple, and their temple is a former Tudor church in Newark. They're also the only registered charity which serves Germanic pagans in the UK, so they're a good one to look at. The following recommendations come from their Book of Rites. It states, "The altar furniture shall consist of the following items. An altar in the form of a table standing on 4 legs and made of wood from any tree native to our country. 1 or better 2 pure white altar cloths to protect the altar, made of linen, cotton or some other natural material. 2 candlesticks made of any suitable metal. A pair of candles either made of beeswax or else white in colour. A pitcher or jug used to contain the mead, which may be covered by a small cloth. A sacred bowl containing soil of the motherland. On the east side of the altar, the Thor's hammer being a representation of Mjolnir. On the other side of the altar, an oath ring made of silver, large enough to be grasped in the hands of 2 men simultaneously, when oaths are taken on it. A mead horn, a tripod or other stand to hold the mead horn may also be used. No other item other than the foregoing and the priest's written text of the rites found in this volume should be placed upon the altar." They also say that at the hallowing, the priest always turns towards the geographical north, regardless of the disposition of the altar, and at the hailing of the Asir, both priest and people do likewise. So it doesn't state that you have to make your altar face north. Obviously at home that can be very difficult to do, depending on the layout of your home. But it does say that even if it doesn't, the person officiating the rites has to face north. They also recommend that you use seasonal decorations to beautify the place of worship, such as evergreens at Yule or blossoms for Easter and things of this sort that are appropriate for the time of year. The second group we shall look at is called the Norroena Society. They are a Nordic pagan study group in North America with the stated goal to rebuild the Asatru faith in a way that will cleanse it of Christian influence and bias. Their reconstructionist approach is outlined on their website and also in the book Afinrunar by Mark Puryear. They use the Norse word stalli, meaning a pagan altar, to describe altars. The stalli, according to saga evidence, is supposed to stand in the middle of the temple room. However, I've spoken to Mark Puryear of the Norroena Society about this, and he says that in the context of a domestic altar, it's obviously acceptable for the altar to be set up in a niche, because it's far from convenient to set up an altar in the middle of a room in your home. Unlike the Odinist Fellowship, the Norroena Society say that the altar cloth should only be made of linen, not cotton, and it should preferably be white. The Norroena Society believe that the stolli must be overlaid with a grid of 9 squares, and they justify this by citing Kjalnesinga Saga, chapter 2. They use this so-called grind pattern, which they believe represents the layout of the underworld. The grid is a square comprised of 9 smaller squares. It can be on a raised wooden platform supported by horns, or in the case of a hörger, it can be a stone altar. I suppose that if you can't get hold of horns to hold up a wooden table, then you could probably use a normal wooden table for your home altar. The Norroena Society also advocate for facing north during rituals, and they justify this by citing Vegtamskvida 9, in which Odin towards the north looked while performing sacred galder, which is an act we should consider in placing the altar. The same act is also seen in Jomsviking Saga chapter 36, when Jarl Håkon to his patron goddess Torgr Holgabrúður kneels down facing the north and prays. To quote Mark Puryear on the subject, "The idea seems to be that the north, as a reflection of Fergalmir and the land the gods originated from, is the direction of prayer, whereas the east is focused upon the dead and offerings, which include dead animals and food. We see this in the Vegtamskvida when Odin comes to speak to the dead vulva, riding towards the eastern door, then praying to the north. Indeed, all of the dead must go through the Helgrinder, and all must travel the Helveger to reach the gods. But the words we sing to them ring out to the origin of life, the origin of the divine, and the beginning of the ages, where the ice melted and the sacred cow gave sustenance to the first beings. The 9 essential components of their 9-square altar are as follows. 1. An oath ring, stallachringer, sometimes called a lindbaugi, serpent ring, is placed on the northeast due to the association of snakes with hell in the north, which is also said to be related to Jotunheim, which resides in the east. 2. Fergolmer is the northernmost well, so the hlautboll in the north represents it. 3. The urahorn represents Authumbla, the primordial cow, who stood atop the northern region of Nidafjol and gave life to the gods. 4. Thor's hammer, Mjolnir, was made in Alfheimr, which, based on the work of Victor Rudberg, the Norroena Society associate with the East. 5. Mimsbrunner lies in the centre of the underworld. 6. Vanaheimr is the land of the Vanir, fertility gods connected to growth and vegetation. Hence, it is connected to the hlauttein. Hlauttein means sticks. Hlaut is the sacrificial blood of a bloat, which is an offering. And the hlautboll, I mentioned previously, there's 3 for the Norroena Society, but we are certain from Norse sources that these bowls were used for the collection of blood. Most modern pagan groups will still use hlaut bowls even if they don't have blood sacrifices. Myself included, I put mead into those bowls because mead and blood and other sacrificial liquids are all interchangeable in a ritual context, so it doesn't really matter. In fact, the blood itself during a sacrifice often symbolically represents mead, so it's no big deal to replace the blood with mead. The hlautteiner are used by the gothi, which is the priest, to sprinkle the blood or mead or whatever other sacrificial liquid is used onto whatever it is that you want to bless, whether it be the idols of the gods or anyone participating in the prayers. So the Norroena Society placed their hlautteiner in the west. They also say to remember that the mistletoe that killed Balder, the god, also grew in the west. So they connect it because mistletoe is a plant and the hlauttein are sticks, twigs of some kind. In this demonstration, I've used oak twigs. 7. Sokdalir lies in the deepest south, and Jotnar are generally connected to the east. The south is where the primordial flames were used to make the sun and stars. 8. Urtherbrunner is the southern well of warmth. It represents fate. 9. Runes are connected to fate and thus are placed next to the well of the Norns in the south. The third group we're going to look at is called Ealdríce Théod. That's Old English and it means folk of the Old Kingdom. And they use Old English because they're Anglo-saxon pagans and they are based in North America and were founded in New York State back in 1989. Their leader, Thorbeort Ealdblottere, has published the following guidelines to help people set up domestic altars and shrines. The guidelines are published in Anglish, which is a form of modern English stripped of non-Germanic elements. So it might sound a little strange if you're not used to this style of writing. One would do well to set forth a stead whereat offerings might be made to the Modru and Ealdríce, that's the mothers and the Disir, of one's kun, more than any gods or goddesses. Your ancestors have a stake in the well-being of your sib, meaning family. one ought to make offerings to the Kofgordus, the cove or cupboard cabinet gods, who are the unseen housewives who inhabit the home. Outside of one's home and at the edge of one's yard, one might do well to set up a small haerg, whereupon one might leave offerings to the landwights. So the Ealdríce Théod do worship idols on their altars during their communal rituals. But they do not provide guidance for how to do this at home. While I do agree with those recommendations that Thorberg put forth there, I do have some difference of opinion on the interpretation of the meaning of the term Kofgordus and also on the typical use of a haerg. The Old English word Kofgordus is only attested once, where it is used to translate the Latin word penates, which refers to protective spirits, often ancestors, who guard the home in Roman pagan religion. This translation does not mean that Kofgordus were directly equivalent to penates. The name Kofgordus means gods of the inner chamber. He translates it as gods of the cupboard. And in my opinion, this originally just referred to the domestic idols, like I have here behind me, of your home, and not to the spirits of the home, just the actual gods, the real gods who you have small idols of in your home, the house gods. He also has recommended that a haerg, which is known in modern English as a harrow, is used for the worship of land spirits. This is a photo of one that they have built for that purpose. And this is my one in my garden. You'll notice I have what's called in Old Norse a vedbond, or in modern English might be called a weband, which is a string suspended between four posts, hazel posts, that demarcates the sacred area and shows that this is not just a typical cairn, this is a holy area. The Old Norse for harrow is hurg, which refers to a pagan altar made from stones. But I think the Old English word haerg, which becomes modern harrow, and which is attested in many place names in England today, may have been a bit more broad, and it's variously translated as pagan temple or sanctuary or even as idol. But like the Norse word, it likely does have a connection to stones too. However, in one Norse source, the poem Hundlaljuth, a man called Ottar builds a hurger explicitly for worshipping the goddess Freya and other goddesses, not for worshipping land spirits. So that's why the harrow in my garden is used exclusively for worshipping Freya and the Disir. I don't use it to worship landwights like Thorberg does. So now you know about how domestic altars are set up according to the recommendations of three of the most important Germanic pagan organizations in the English-speaking world today. It's time to learn how I do things. A lot of this is just my personal opinion. I don't say that you have to do what I do, but I'll explain why I do things the way I do, and perhaps you'd like to copy some of the things I do, perhaps you wouldn't, but you'll notice that there's a great deal of variation from person to person. That doesn't mean you can do anything you want, because not everything works. At the end of the day, there's a reason you're setting up an altar. That's to please the gods, and if it doesn't please the gods, then you've done it wrong. First off, where should you put it? Well, the hearth is traditionally the center of the home. It's the spiritual center of the home. Indo-Europeans very focused on fire. So of course the hearth is a center for the home. And for that reason, there's a mantle above your hearth. That's an ideal place for the shrine, for the home altar, domestic altar. And indeed, that was for years where my domestic altar was, above the fireplace. However, I decided to move it. It is worth noting also that the hearth itself should be placated, the spirit of the hearth, not a god, but there's a tradition that the hearth itself has a spirit that ought to be placated by keeping it clean and perhaps offering it food or something of that sort from time to time. But yes, I moved it away from the hearth and I reset up my altar here in a niche. That's because a niche, if you have any niche in your home, a niche is basically a liminal space. It's not somewhere that is a final destination. It's just its own little corner. A corner or a niche is a good place for a shrine because it's liminal and also doesn't get in the way. Then it's its own little place. And liminal spaces are vital in pagan religions because when we, in this middle yard, approach the gods of Asgard, we are going from one place to the next and therefore are entering a liminal space between worlds. And that's why liminal spaces, such as at the edge of a water, such as a riverbank, or at the barrow, a liminal space between the world of the living and the dead, those are very good places to conduct pagan rituals. So looking for liminal spaces in your home is a good idea when you're choosing where to set up your domestic altar. So this is my altar. You'll notice much in common with the other examples. I use a white linen altar cloth. There is a drinking horn for an offering of mead libations. There is a silver arm ring for swearing oaths, and there is a bowl in the centre. Also, like the others, I always light a flame for any ritual. Many Indo-European pagan religions, from the cult of the Vestal Virgins in Rome to the Baltic pagans of the north, the Hindus of India, and the Zoroastrians of Iran, all had sacred ritual fires. The flame, whether a bonfire, a candle, or an oil lamp, acts as a pure and cleansing witness to the rite. The lighted lamp or candle can also serve as an offering to a god. I use a bell as an oral equivalent to a flame. The lighting of the flame and the ringing of the bell signify the start of the ritual. Bells are attested in the cult of my god Ealdríce and are also widely used in other Indo-European religions, including Hinduism and Buddhism. It is widely believed that the sound of a bell can banish impure spirits from a place. Thus it cleanses, just like fire. Unlike the first two examples I showed, I always worship images of the gods in my house. These are my kofgårdas, and these three are known sometimes as the Uppsala Trimurti. Trimurti is a Hindu term meaning three idols, and Uppsala was the sacred centre of paganism in Sweden 1,000 odd years ago. I used to live in Uppsala, so it's an important place for me. The three gods represent Woden, Thunor and Yngwifrey, known in Old Norse as Odin, Thor and Freyr. The first two groups I mentioned do not oppose the use of idols. I should make that clear. But evidently neither of them considered it essential to include an idol in the setup of the altar. I personally do. This is partly because I'm very influenced by theurgy, which is a pagan philosophy that came out of the Greek-speaking world, particularly the Platonist school, the Platonist Academy, and was championed by Emperor Julian and by the philosopher Iamblichus, who was a Syrian who practiced Greek paganism. According to Iamblichus, the gods create all things by means of images. They signify all things through synthemata. The sacred idols of the gods are included among these, and they function as receptacles of the gods. To quote Iamblichus, intellectual understanding does not connect theurgists with divine beings, for what would prevent those who philosophize theoretically from having theurgic union with the gods? But this is not true. Rather, it is the perfect accomplishment of ineffable acts, religiously performed and beyond all understanding, and it is the power of ineffable symbols comprehended by the gods alone that establishes theurgical union. Thus, we don't perform these acts intellectually, for then their energy would be intellectual and depend on us, which is not at all true. In fact, these very symbols by themselves perform their own work, and the ineffable power of the gods with which these symbols are charged itself recognizes by itself its own images. It is not awakened to this by our thinking. So all of my idols on the altar behind me are replicas of Viking Age statuettes, which are thought to represent the gods I intend them to represent, Thor, Odin and Yngvi. I thus consider them suitable receptacles for the god. They are proper synthemata. I have adorned 2 of them with gold leaf to further beautify the images and entice the gods to inhabit them. I highly recommend you use appropriate images of the gods as part of your altar. And whether you make them yourself or you buy them, the most important thing is that they are appropriate and that they don't diverge in any significant way from what is an attested and appropriate image of that god, so that you can entice the actual god to inhabit the idol and participate in the rituals. And then you will find that the rituals are much more effective. I also burn incense, which none of the others have mentioned. It's known in Old English as rachels, and it's not attested in Germanic paganism, but I've never considered that to be particularly important, because Hindus, Buddhists, Roman pagans, Greek pagans, all these different Indo-European groups use incense, and it makes a pleasant aroma for the gods. And that is often the reason that is given for why sacrificial animals are roasted. For example, the Greeks say that the smell of roasted meat is pleasing to the gods. The gods like pleasing smells as an offering. They like nice mead or nice healthy animals sacrificed. So why would they not also want to have nice smelling offerings? And whatever kind of incense you use is up to you. I mean, you could use an indigenous Scandinavian pine resin as an incense. I've burned that before and it smells lovely, but I don't see the need to specifically use indigenous resins. But I do consider it conducive to making a sacred atmosphere to burn incense. And it also has a kind of a cleansing effect, because you're making nice smells and smoke fill up the sacred area and designate it as sacred. And of course the incense is itself an offering given to the gods in Greek and Roman cultures as well as in Hindu. So yes, I think the Germanic gods are perfectly willing to receive incense as an offering. I position what is called in Old Norse a hlautbolli in the center of the altar, where for me it represents Mimisbrunner, just like in the Norroena Society, their setup, except they have 3 bowls representing the 3 wells of the underworld. And the Odinist Fellowship recommend 1 bowl which is not filled with mead but rather with earth to represent the motherland, whereas I use 1 bowl and I fill it with mead, and it represents for me Mimisbrunner, the well of memory in the underworld, which Odin went to in order to drink from. He had to sacrifice an eye. So I positioned the bowl in front of the idol of Woden, where he looks down into the mead, because the mead, whenever I have a ritual, for me, the mead becomes the mead of memory, the mead of the underworld. And by drinking in it, I participate in Odin's sacrificial act. And I hope, like him, to receive the wisdom of the underworld from partaking in that mead, the sacred mead, which was so important for Odin to pursue. So following his example, I seek the wisdom of that mead. And that's why the central hlautboll to me is representative of that well, which is the most important well, as far as I'm concerned. You can see what I'm doing here and what the other's doing is very much considering the symbolism of the items you're putting on the altar. And I think you should do that too. The symbolic meaning of the altar items should pertain directly to the gods of that altar. Some people like to collect all kinds of random bits and bobs and put them all over the altar, and those can have significance to them personally, and that's why they like to include them. However, I would advise against cluttering the altar with things that are unnecessary. That isn't to say that you have to only have these things that I put on my altar, but whatever you put on the altar is a symbolic receptacle for the divinity you're calling, or it should attempt to be. And if you want it to function as a receptacle, it must be an appropriate receptacle for that god. It must pertain to that god somehow. Ealdríce says that Théod created them with stones, lithoi, herbs, botany, animals, zoa, aromatics, aromata, and other sanctified objects that possessed intimate affiliations with the gods invoked. As Germanic pagans, we know well that, for example, the ash tree is fitting for Odin. The birch tree is fitting for Freyr. The oak tree is fitting for Thor. So you should consider the known symbolic associations of items like certain trees, for example, with the gods when you're putting bits and bobs all over your altar. Ealdríce, not a Germanic pagan, he's a Greek pagan, but he's a philosopher and he's a pagan, and he's justifying pagan ritual practices for us in clear terminology, which is something Snorri Sturluson and other people who wrote down the Norse myths didn't do. So that's why I find it very helpful to refer to him. But Ealdríce makes it clear that if the objects used to consecrate a shrine don't possess synthemata of the god invoked, then theurgic contact will not be possible. Meaning you will not have any interaction with the god that you desire. Do be a little bit discriminating when you put things on your altar. Be conscious of why you're doing it. Don't just do it like impulsively. Try and think like, what is this thing I'm putting on the altar? Which god is it for? How does it help me to interact with and to propitiate the god that is being invoked? I think if you start with those principles, you'll go on the right path. And also, don't be afraid to reach out to some of the groups I've mentioned and ask them for advice, because the people who run those groups are all very nice and they've all helped me a lot in the past. So that's partly why I've chose them. There are other great groups out there, and I did reach out to a few others who weren't able to provide me with any guidance on how they recommend people set up their domestic altars. So I haven't included them, not because I have anything against them, but just because this video is specifically about setting up domestic altars. And the reason some don't provide guidance on that is because some groups prefer to let people do whatever they like, and they don't like to micromanage people's domestic worship, which is up to them. But I do think it's good to give some guidance and help people to develop a structure for their home altar. So now you've seen this, I hope you found it very helpful. Don't forget to check out that video on how to pray like a pagan. It's from more than 5 years ago. If you like this video, click like, click subscribe. Think about becoming a patron, because you'll get access to a whole load of special videos and the opportunity to chat with me personally during my voice chat sessions on Telegram, and you'll get priority for your questions during my AMA streams on my other channel called Jive Talk, which is for live streams and interviews. I'll probably do some more guides for pagans like this in future, but most of the videos on this channel are history documentaries. So if you're not a pagan and you're wondering what on earth you've just watched, don't worry, there will be more history documentaries in future. And if you are a pagan and you like this, well, there's quite a high possibility that I'll do more videos like this if people like them. Thank you very much for watching. I'm Tom Rousel. This has been Survive the Jive.